Well, it is officially October, and you know what that means. It means September is over. Thank God! Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jason, or Ezeekat. You might know me as one or both of those things. I'm glad you're here. Today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in September. September was a month in this year. I feel like it just went by in a flash. I feel like I blinked and September was gone. I don't know how that happened. I'm going to New York Comic Con in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks. How did that happen? I feel like 5 seconds ago, I was like, oh, I'm going to New York Comic Con in a couple months. And now it's like less than 2 weeks. What? I'm confused. Now, before I get started today, I wanted to take a quick moment to talk about something that started in September that I haven't really had a chance to talk about on YouTube and just share with you. So as of September, I have launched a site with Bindery called Ezeekat Press. Now, Bindery is very, very, very similar to Patreon. So if you're familiar with Patreon, you already kind of know the gist, where people sign up for different levels of memberships. It gets them different things. The cool thing about Bindery is that it's very, very exclusively book focused. What's cool about that is that I'm able to upload exclusive content, which I've been doing like little daily vlogs and uploading some other fun things on there. I'm going to be doing a read-along specifically with my Bindery community starting this month, which I think is going to be super fun. But also part of the funds from those memberships gets set aside, and then eventually I can use that to publish a book under the Ezeekat Press name, which is really neat. I've already been reading manuscripts that I've gotten submitted. I'm going to be doing an open manuscript submission later in October so that independent authors have a chance to submit as well, because everything I'm looking at so far is coming from agented submissions. So we're going to be doing a pitch fest so that independent authors also have a chance to get their book seen. So it's really, really cool. It's essentially, like I said, it's a membership community. So I'll put the link down below if that's something you're interested in. It's really fun, and I love the content I'm able to make there because it's a little less edited, a little less filtered. It's kind of like the content I make here on my monthly YouTube videos, except I make it in shorter little chunks, like 5 or 10 minutes, and I just pick a topic and chat, and it feels like we kind of just sit down and have a little talk every day. It's very nice, and it's very different than a lot of the content on my other pages. I feel like to me, I'm treating it kind of like a daily video diary and just kind of sharing some thoughts with you guys. So if that's something you're interested in helping support all of these crazy things that I do with books and board games and all the other nonsense, feel free to check it out. Now, of course, you're here for the books. You're here to see what I read in September. So let's jump in. Let's start off strong. So this month I reread Assassin's Apprentice. Now, I say reread, but I read this quite a while back and long enough ago that I didn't remember anything about it. It essentially was a first time read. And I know from the rating I gave it on Goodreads, I didn't write a review, but I gave it a rating, that I didn't love it, but I did really like it this time. I felt I had some mixed feelings. I think I really did enjoy it. I think Robin Hobb's writing is fantastic. But this is a book that I read all the way through and loved purely for the writing. I didn't really love any of the characters. I feel like story-wise, not very much happened. It was one of those books where you get to the end and you're like, what actually happened in this book? Let's think about it. And really, it's not a lot. I think Fitz as a main character, I've been told by a lot of people that he grows, which thank goodness, because in this book, he really just does whatever the adult closest to him tells him to do the entire book. So he doesn't really have much of a personality of his own, but I'm told that Robin Hobb is a slow burn and that he will eventually evolve. So what I ended up really, truly loving about this book was the writing. I thought the writing was just stunning. The prose are beautiful. It's a book that I had a hard time putting down because I just wanted to get lost in this world. And I said this in my TikTok review, but reading this felt like sitting on a bench in this olden, high fantasy world, sitting on a bench and just people watching. That's what it felt like, because the world is just so engrossing and it just envelops you. And the writing just really brings you in, and it paints this beautiful picture of this world. Like I said, the story is not like edge of my seat, like what's going to happen next. The characters are not like, oh, I just love these characters so much. Like I said, none of that really resonated with me, but the writing style was just absolutely phenomenal. And I'm excited to see what happens next. I've been told by a lot of people that this really sets up a lot of things, and going forward, we get to see more and more of Fitz kind of coming into his own and seeing how this world evolves and how the magic system evolves. I'm really excited to see all of that, and I bought a nicer version of the trilogy because I don't love this cover. I bought a nicer looking... Hold on, I might be able to show them to you. Hold on. I bought these covers. I haven't opened them yet because they just came in, but they're nicer. They're much more, and they're going to look better on my bookshelf, right? Yeah. So I got these, so I'll be reading the rest of the series. I don't know if I'm going to continue the series in October. I have a pretty long list of books I want to read in October, so if I get through those, this will be the first thing that I add on additionally. But we'll see. Otherwise, this will be a November read, which I think works perfectly as well. So yeah, that's Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Next up, let's talk about my monthly Discworld read. So this month I read Feet of Clay. Now, if you saw my TikTok about this, you know that I thought it was an excellent book. While I don't think it's my favorite Discworld book I've read so far, because I think that still belongs to The Witches with Witches Abroad, I do think this is the best Discworld book I've read so far. It's so nuanced in so many ways. It's so thoughtful. It's so well put together. I mean, this book is so ahead of its time. I think I was saying in that video that it was originally published, I want to say 1996, and it's wild that this was published in 1996 because it really is talking about so many issues that are so prevalent in 2023. It's talking about diversity in the workplace. It's talking about police systems and law enforcement systems. It's talking about pronouns. There's literally a line where Angua is like, "This is Ankh-Morpork. We've got extra pronouns here." People act like talking about pronouns and talking about diversity is something that literally just popped up last year and now we're having to talk about it all the time. But clearly it's not. Like that is a main focus of this book. And it's crazy to me that this book feels like it could have been published yesterday. It just feels so current and on point. I mean, there's a whole ongoing joke about Vimes playing with this. Essentially, to me, in my head, he's playing with a smartphone and not able to use it correctly because he's so used to just using pen and paper, and he has this awful thing. And him talking to the, I think it was like a little demon inside this device that's supposed to like keep notes and stuff for him, reminded me so much of people trying to get Siri to do the things they want Siri to do. Like, why won't you do what I want you to? And it's so funny and it's so current, which is just, it blows my mind that it feels so current. The other thing I love about this book is that there is a mystery involved. So there's a mystery that they're trying to solve happening in Ankh-Morpork, and I thought the mystery was really intriguing. And I think that's really fun, like when you really feel like it's a whodunit. With the golems, I loved the exploration of, are golems human, and what does it mean to be a person, and what is free will, and how do we get free will, and how do we interpret free will in things that we don't really know if they exist or not. All of that was just so good. Like I said, I do think this is the best Discworld book that I've read so far. Witches Abroad just has a special place in my heart because it has all these fairy tales, and I love Granny Weatherwax, and I love Nanny Og, and I love all of that. But if I had to pick a very close second, I think it would be Feet of Clay. This book was absolutely excellent. Some of the best Terry Pratchett I've read up to this point, reading these books in order, and it just was delightful. I think for me, so many people have been like, oh, the Night Watch, the Watch are my favorite characters, they're my favorite books, and so far I've been like, well, they're good, but I don't know if they're my favorite. But this book was really a turning point for me. Like, this book really took me from like being, oh, a watch book, that'll be fun, to like, now I'm really looking forward to future watch books, because I love Carrot, I love Angua, I love these characters that are in the watch, because they're all so ridiculous, but they're all just so full of heart and personality, and I love them. So this was excellent, Feet of Clay. All right, we talked about 2 books I liked. Let's get into some books I didn't like. I finally finished Narnia this month with The Last Battle, and whoo! My goodness, this book. Now, my biggest complaint about this book comes at the end of the book. So if you have not read Narnia or you haven't read The Last Battle, I am going to spoil it. All right, 3, 2, 1. Let's get into it. All of them die at the end. They literally like 2 paragraphs from the end of the book, Aslan turns around and is like, oh, by the way, you're dead. All of this nonsense about Narnia and Aslan, only to find out, oh, did you know you died in a train accident? What the hell? This book, this series, absolutely not. And I get it. I get the implications, right? Like, oh, they went off to live in heaven and blah, 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 blah. But from like look at this from a point of view of like someone who like grew up religious and is no longer religious, it's ridiculous that it's like, oh, congratulations, you're dead. And I love that their sister basically is the only one. I forget her name now. I've completely forgotten her name. The sister that doesn't get to come along. Okay, I found it. Susan. So I love that Susan doesn't get to come back to Narnia because basically she's become too adult, right? Like, she's no longer a believer. Okay, but what's funny about that is she's the only one that survives all of this. And one of the reasons they give, by the way, for her not being allowed to come back to Narnia is that she started wearing makeup. Like, what? I don't know. Everything about this book just like solidified all my feelings about this entire series. And it's wild. It's wild that a children's fantasy series ends with all of the children dying. It's not funny, but it's funny that it's so absolutely nuts and that it's like completely acceptable and that people are just like, oh my God, I love Narnia so much. I grew up with them. They're great. They're ridiculous. And they really push this like insane narrative. And I just, these books, these books are insane. And I say that in like, that's the only way to describe it. Like, I get the allegory, I get the symbolism, but if you look at them, if you take out the, I mean, even with the symbolism, to me it sounds nutty, but if you take out the symbolism entirely, it's bananagrams. That this is like a children's fantasy series that people are like, yeah, that's one of the good ones. I am beside myself. I think if you're gonna read Narnia, here's what I'll tell you. If you're gonna read Narnia, I say read The Magician's Nephew, read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, read Prince Caspian and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And that's it. Read those, and even those four are questionable, but those are the four that are worth reading. After that, everything just gets zany. And this book, I just could not believe how this book ended. I mean, I didn't mind all the lead up to it and the action and the battles, but I think this book represents so many things that I don't like about like organized religion and things like that, and it bottles them up in this way that is supposed to be like, look, if you just believe and don't wear makeup, you can make it to Narnia too. And I felt anger when I finished this book. I felt anger. I felt anger, and then I laughed at how ridiculous it was. So that's the end of Narnia. That is how we finished Narnia. And I will never read these books again. No, I will not. In fact, I'm probably going to end up selling my copies or giving them away to like friends or a local like library or something, because I don't need these on my shelf. That is how much I did not enjoy Narnia, especially the last couple of books. Woof. What a series. Next up, how do we recover from that? Next up, let's talk about the Grimoire of Grey Fates. So this is a book I thought was just okay. Now, let me kind of build the concept, because I love the concept, okay? I love the concept. I love this book in theory. So this is a book that is about a magical school where essentially a bunch of different characters are going to this magical school, and a murder has happened, and now they have to find out. We're working through the story to see how the murder occurred. And what's really cool is that every chapter is about a different character, and every chapter is written by a different up-and-coming young adult author. And that is so cool. And what's cool about the two is that all of the authors involved, I mean, it's a very diverse list. I mean, some of them, I'm sure you'll know, Kat Cho, Mason Deaver, Victoria Lee, let's see, Julian Winters, some really, Darcy Littlebadger, just some really excellent names are involved here, right? I mean, I'll hold it up here. Oh, you won't be able to see because I have, well, look it up. Every single name on the list is phenomenal. All of the writing of all of those chapters was phenomenal, and all of the diversity of the characters was phenomenal. The problem I have is that all of that is so good, and it just doesn't seem to work together. The fact that we were jumping to a different character each chapter, and the fact that there weren't really any characters that got, like, with the exception of a couple towards the end, that got any real closure. Like, I almost wish there hadn't been the murder mystery part of it, and it had just been like little encapsulated stories about all of these different characters, because all of it trying to work together ended up making almost every chapter feel like not enough. Like, I feel like I didn't get enough from each chapter, because just when you started to get to know a character, you're like, ooh, this character is very interesting, I'm liking their story, the chapter would end. When I read an anthology, you kind of want like little arcs, right? Like you want like an introduction, you want a little like each chapter should be a little bit of an arc, and it really wasn't. It was like, here's a character, here's their story, they're very interesting, aren't you interested? Okay, they're done now, we're moving on to the next one. And I didn't love that part about it. It's so unfortunate because there's so many. I love all of the components of this book. I just don't think they all work together very well, which is so sad. I do still think it's worth reading. I think if you heard me talking about kind of the concept of this book and you said, that sounds really neat, I wouldn't tell you not to read this book. If anything, I think it's a great way to introduce yourself to some of these authors, especially if you've never read them before, because they're showing off their work in this book. And I think that's what I love about anthologies, is that they're able to show off the work of many different authors at once. I will say, as a grand whole of a book, it doesn't work all that well, and as individual chapters about characters, kind of part of this bigger system of the book, bigger ecosystem of the book, it doesn't really work all that well. But it's fun to see all of these authors working together to put together a story. I love the idea. I do. I love the concept. I love the authors involved. I loved a lot of the characters in the book, and their stories, and the way that this school is amazing. I mean, with the magical school, and you have diverse systems of magic, and you have diverse characters, and it's all great. It just doesn't quite click together. It's like a beautiful puzzle where the pieces are all just slightly the wrong size, so they don't fit together. That's what this book feels like. I wanted it to be better, and I would love if the people who edited this book tried again. I would love for them to do something like this again in the future, and maybe took the criticisms of this book and what didn't quite work in this book to make it better, because I think it's such a cool idea, and I wanted it to work so badly, and it just kind of missed the mark. I have been reading Kevin Hearne's The Iron Druid Chronicles. I read book 2 this month. These are delightful. They remind me a lot of the Dresden Files, though I do think they're better than the Dresden Files. I think I like the world a little bit more. I like the main character quite a bit more than Harry Dresden. I think the way that the world is intertwined is really interesting. I think maybe my only real critique of these books is, and it's not even really a critique, it's just that they're very short, and they really just feel like installments. They kind of feel like each one kind of feels like its own little TV episode, installments in a bigger whole, because they're clearly all very connected. Like, these are books that are meant to kind of be binged, like read one after another after another. And when I think about like binging stories, I really think about like TV shows, especially like streaming TV shows. Like, I feel like these books are meant to be read to like back to back to back to back. I'm not going to be doing that, but I bought book 3 hammered. I'll probably read it in the next month or month and a half-ish. But I am really enjoying these books quite a bit. I think that there are aspects of them that do feel a little dated by 2023 standards. So I will say that there's definitely things in them that are a little cringy sometimes, or I'm like, ugh. But for the most part, I think they're really interesting. And I'm loving the magic system. I'm loving the main character. I'm loving his dog. Like, I'm still really enjoying it. This book really just continues our story from the first book. It doesn't change too much about the structure. We just open up the world a little bit more in some really interesting ways. And I really like how the book deals with like gods from different religions and pantheons, and magic from different religions and pantheons. Like, it finds a way to make it fit really well together, and it feels very natural. Like, it feels like a very real world. Like, this is a kind of magical book that feels like it literally could be happening across the street from you. And I love that about it. So I'm really enjoying these, and I'm going to keep reading them. And I'm curious if you've read the Iron Druid Chronicles and what you think of them. And also these new covers. Whew! These new covers got me to read these series. So whoever designed these, good job. This month for Ezeekat's Book Club, we read The Wager. Now, this is a tale of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder by David Grann. Now, this is a nonfiction story about these ships that set off and basically ended up like marooned on this island, and then the crew started like, it gets very Lord of the Flies, and and then when they get back to civilization finally, there's a lot of mixed stories, and people are kind of like trying to cover their butts about what actually, they're like, well, I don't recall us eating another crew member on that island. I don't think that happened. It's okay. This book had been really hyped for me. It is nonfiction. I think it is some of the more accessible nonfiction that I've read, because it is written very much like a story. But I will say the first chapter basically lays out everything that's going to happen in the book. And so there really weren't any surprises. Everything sort of happened. It was like, here's what happened. And then it went on to tell the entire book, to tell us deeper of what happened. And it was interesting, sure. I definitely was intrigued by what was going on, and I read through the whole book. But I got to the end, and I think that the trouble that I find with nonfiction, especially when it's told as like a complete story, is it tends to be underwhelming. I think you get to the end of a story like this, and because it's written because it's written like fiction, but it is in fact nonfiction. Real life does not follow a natural plot line or a natural plot arc, right? With an opening and then a second act and then, a climax and third act. It doesn't follow that natural rhythm. So it ends up feeling, for when you're reading it and it makes you feel like you're reading fiction, it ends up feeling very disjointed because you want it to have kind of that natural curve and it doesn't. And you get to the end and there's not really, there's not really too much closure. It's sort of, because in real life, things don't have nice little perfect bows tied around them endings. And so you get to the end and you're like, oh, well, I guess that's how that ended then. Okay. And so this book, I don't know. I either wish that it was written more like nonfiction, or I wish that the story had been fiction and inspired by the nonfiction story, which I'm sure there are probably fictional tales or books that are based on this story out there somewhere. Because as it stands, it's like this kind of weird middle ground. And because it's written in such a fictional prose sort of way, my brain wants it to read like fiction, but it's not, so it doesn't. That being said, I did find it all very interesting. It did cause me to go and do some research after to learn more. There were definitely a lot of moments where I was like, wow, I am glad I am not a sailor during this time because their life sounds terrible. I mean, every chapter, something new that was horrible happened. And I was like, yeah, that sounds awful. Okay, great. That sounds awful. And so there's that. I think, I walked away from this book having learned about a story that I didn't know before. So that was really interesting. But I don't know, it definitely didn't fill my cup in any way. I definitely didn't walk away from this wow, this is the book. If you're going to read nonfiction, this is the book you have to read. It didn't make me think, wow, I need to read more nonfiction. It didn't have the opposite effect. I was like, you know what? Nonfiction just isn't for me. And that's okay. But what I will say, and I said this already, but I'll say it again, I do think this is some of the most accessible nonfiction I've ever read. So if you're looking to dabble in nonfiction and see if that might be your vibe, this might be worth reading because then you can kind of see if it's something that you'd be interested in. And like I said, it was a very interesting story. If you're looking for a real life story of seafaring and being lost on islands and eating each other, if you're looking for that, you might try reading The Wager. I thought it was all right. Yeah, it was okay. One last book, and then I'll just give you a quick little manga update. So I was going to save this for October, but I actually ended up getting a chance to read the first book of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy at the very end of September. So I was able to get that read, which I thought was really great. So this, as you can see, this book has all 5 or 6 or 5. This has the whole thing. I only read the first one, which is actually called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was funny. I mentioned this in my TikTok and Reels review. I loved Marvin, the depressed android. Man, he made my day. He was so funny. I think the writing here is very witty and it's very smart and it's very thoughtful. And it does remind me of Terry Pratchett a lot. I think where the two authors so far differ is I think Terry Pratchett's writing has a lot more heart and a little bit more love baked in. Here, almost everything is done at the expense of the joke and of the message, to the point where there are characters introduced that I just feel had no purpose of even being introduced. I feel like there were characters, especially Trillian, who I've been told has more to do later on, but I felt in this book, it felt like she was introduced for the sole purpose of a couple jokes. She was there just so they could make a couple jokes in regards to her and then move on. But then she was still a character there, so they had to keep her in some scenes. And I felt that way about a lot of the characters in this book. I felt like a lot of characters get introduced and they just don't really have much of a personality. And especially Arthur Dent, the main character, I just feel like he's just such a shell of a person. And I think that might be on purpose because I think he's supposed to be a character that we can kind of self-insert into to really see this ridiculous situation that is happening through his eyes, through his very British eyes. Listen, he had some funny lines. He has some moments that made me chuckle. But as a character, if you were to ask me what are Arthur Dent's hopes and dreams? What's a characteristic of Arthur? I wouldn't be able to tell you because he doesn't have a lot. He's really just there to be the human character in the center of this wild story, to be baffled and confused and upset, the way that any of us would be baffled and confused and upset by this situation. That's his existence in this book is simply that, to be the person who reacts to the situations how we would react to the situation. But there's so many little moments of this book that are just fantastic. I mean, I love the aspect of the mice being super intelligent and them being the ones pulling all the strings. I love the dolphins like knowing ahead of time and basically just being like, so long and thanks for all the fish. I love there's like a little story about an alien race that gets really upset at us and comes to like wage war and ends up getting eaten by a dog. There's so many little excellent moments, and I'm excited to see really where this story goes, because the story really doesn't end. Like I understand now why this book is almost like, I don't think I've ever seen this series sold as individual books in bookstores. I know they exist, but I've never come upon them. Every time I find this series, it's in one single book. And it makes sense because the first book like doesn't even end. Like it doesn't have a climax, it doesn't have a third act, barely has a second act. It just ends and it's like, okay, well now we're gonna go over here now. Credits roll. Like that's basically how the book ends. Which, you know, the whole idea is that you're supposed to continue on to the next one and just keep reading. But as a single standalone book, I felt like at the end I was like, that's it. Like zero closure, zero like full circle. Like there's no moment where you're like, we've come to the end of our story. It was more like, we've come to a bend, we're turning this way, and now the book's over. Like that was kind of the end of the book, which fine. Very funny. I'm excited to read the rest of it. This is our next read along. So now that Narnia is finished, thank goodness, our next read along is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So I'll be reading one, maybe two of these a month, probably one a month until we get through them, and then we'll move on to something else. But I've always wanted to read these, so I think it's a great time to do it. And so far, so good. I hope that the characters evolve a little bit more, but I'm loving the writing so far. So yeah. And finally, just a quick little manga update. I am still reading One Piece, so I did finish the East Blue Saga. If you're following me on TikTok, you know that I'm also watching all of One Piece. So I'm reading along, kind of reading behind what I am watching, just to kind of see how it goes. Here's the thing. The manga and the anime, for the most part, are identical. There are moments in the anime where there are more things or filler or there are extra bits. But 95% they're basically the same. However, I love the little like cover stories. I love the Q&As. Like the Q&As with Oda, the author, are so good, and they're so funny and they're so interesting. The manga alone is worth reading for the Q&As because I am just loving his little insights, but not just his little insights, just his humor. Like the humor that he puts into the story. It's great to see him have that same humor when he is answering questions from fans. I just think it's so great. Like you really realize like that's just him. Like his humor is just kind of wacky and zany. And I love that. And he also does, like, there are little things where they, like, do, like, little dissections of the ship, or they'll do, like, storyboards. So I'm finding reading both the manga and watching the show to be very, very worth my time, because I'm really enjoying both, and I'm enjoying, like, the little differences, but I'm also just really enjoying those in-between moments where we get little insights into the author or the greater world or answers to questions. It's so fun. And that is what I read in September. It was just a whole bunch of books. It was so much fun. I have a massive TBR set up for October, so I hopefully will have a lot of books to show you in October that I read. A couple of quick reminders. If you're interested in joining Ezeekat's book club, I'll put a link down below. We are reading The Ghosts of Rose Hill for October. It's a pretty short book, so if you've been thinking about joining the book club but you're afraid of the time commitment, this is a very short book, so it's a great month to kind of check out Fable and check out what we do in the club and see if it's for you. Completely free to join. So even if you just want to join and check it out, go for it. And then the other thing I'll mention is Ezeekat Press is a subscription-based community where you can join, get exclusive content, and also be part of us publishing a book together. How exciting is that? I'll put a link to that down below as well. And of course, make sure to follow and like and subscribe if you want to see my YouTube videos here as well. I hope you have an awesome day. I hope you have an awesome October. And as always, happy reading.